Good morning and welcome back to Rising. We've got another great show for you today. It is Thursday, and I don't know, I think I got a full night's sleep for the first time in weeks, so I'm in a good mood right now.
Well, I love to hear that you're in a good mood,
But
Robby.
shall it continue? That's the question, Linda.
Well, I'm here, so clearly it will
think
continue.
Indeed.
What's on your radar, Robby?
Happy to tell you. Let's get right to it. Dr. Jay Bhattacharya appeared before senators yesterday for his confirmation hearing to lead the National Institutes of Health. An esteemed professor of public health at Stanford University, Bhattacharya became known for making thoughtful criticisms of the government's handling of COVID-19. He was interviewed on Rising. For speaking up against compulsory lockdowns, masking, and vaccination, Bhattacharya was muzzled by social media companies. Now, he argues that this was done at the behest of the Biden administration. During his remarks on Wednesday, Bhattacharya emphasized that public health had gone astray, and under his tenure, NIH, the National Institutes of Health, would no longer promote censorship and groupthink. Let's watch.
If confirmed, I will establish a culture of respect for free speech in science and scientific dissent at the NIH. Over the last few years, top NIH officials oversaw a culture of cover-up, obfuscation, and a lack of tolerance for ideas that differed from theirs. Dissent is the very essence of science. I'll foster a culture where NIH leadership will actively encourage different perspectives and create an environment where scientists, including early career scientists and scientists that disagree with me, can express disagreement.
Very important remarks. Now, it's important to reflect on the vast censorship that occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic due to under the auspices of public health guidelines. Let me take you back to the summer of 2021, at which point the COVID-19 pandemic had entered a new phase. Vaccines were widely available for those who wanted them, and coronavirus cases had declined as the initial wave was beaten back. Now, even so, mass vaccination did not end the pandemic. The vaccines offered considerable protection against severe disease and death, particularly for the elderly and at-risk population, but they did not prevent infection. The frustration from the public health establishment was palpable, and top policymakers within the Biden administration blamed vaccine-hesitant individuals for, in their minds, exacerbating the pandemic. In July, President Biden said, quote, "The only pandemic we have is among the unvaccinated." Among government health advisors, a consensus quickly formed that the main culprit was medical misinformation on social media, which I guess Jay Bhattacharya was one of the people guilty of spreading. Biden asserted that Facebook had blood on its hands and implied that regulation would follow if moderation on social media did not improve. As a consequence, social media company Facebook effectively put the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in charge of determining what kind of speech would be permitted on the platform. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy published a report on, quote, confronting health misinformation that encouraged social media platforms to prioritize early detection of misinformation superspreaders, limit their reach wherever possible. In other words, censorship. The Center for Countering Digital Hate, an activist nonprofit organization, coined the term the Disinformation Dozen to refer to the 12 social media accounts most responsible for the spread of anti-vax narratives and urged social media companies to take action. The anti-misinformation efforts were not just talk. They had a legislative component as well. This is what I really wanted to get to today. Senator Amy Klobuchar was particularly animated on this issue. July 22nd, 2021, she introduced the Health Misinformation Act, which would have granted broad new powers to the Secretary of Health and Human Services. These powers would have included the ability of the Secretary to reduce online platforms' protection from liability under Section 230, which is the federal law that immunizes websites from liability for user speech. In effect, summarizing it, Klobuchar's bill would have established that the federal government could use a public health emergency as a pretext to erode vital free speech protections at the whims of Health and Human Services. Now, it's clear whose speech Klobuchar was interested in censoring, people like Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. Also, her press release accompanying her bill explicitly mentioned that so-called disinformation dozen. Klobuchar and her fellow Democrats wanted to empower the HHS secretary to censor COVID speech with which they disagreed. Needless to say, the Health Misinformation Act actually never did become law. That might be a relief to Klobuchar at present because the secretary of HHS is now Robert F. Kennedy Jr. one of the very social media users accused by her and by Democrats of being a misinformation superspreader. If her bill had been enacted, it would have eventually empowered Kennedy, someone she thinks of and the mainstream media thinks of as encouraging vaccine hesitancy, by promoting the idea that vaccines are dangerous, that person to make determinations about what counts as misinformation online. Now, Kennedy has regularly condemned government-directed censorship of health topics online, so maybe he would have never used this ability. He has a principled objection to it. But look, it's not completely impossible to imagine some alternate reality where, say, the Health Misinformation Act is law and RFK's HHS is pushing social media companies to add warning labels about potential adverse effects to social media posts about vaccination, if that is indeed his view of vaccines. Now, this is precisely why the First Amendment vastly constrains the government's ability to make determinations about what kinds of speech are valid. Politicians would be tempted to propose new restrictions on speech that target their opponents, and even well-intentioned efforts to promote the public well-being are bound to be abused by whomever is swept into power next. Then there's the small matter of the would-be censors subsequently being proven wrong time and time again, so-called experts blithely asserting that anyone casting aspersions on social distancing, mask mandates, lockdowns, school closures were succumbing to misinformation. Yet the criticisms of these policies have fared better than the policies themselves. That's without even mentioning the widespread suppression and demonization of the lab leak theory of COVID's origins, which was initially branded racist conspiracy theory. You might remember that. It was vigorously censored on Facebook as a result. 4 years later, both the Energy Department and the FBI have concluded that lab leak is the more plausible explanation. Now, there's little reason to think that giving the federal government even more power to police coronavirus misinformation on social media via Klobuchar's proposed law would have benefited the public. On the contrary, it would have resulted in the censorship of worthwhile dissenting viewpoints, viewpoints that are protected by the First Amendment, regardless of the status of Section 230. But it's doubly ironic that passing such a law would have massively backfired. The very people that Democrats, the mainstream media, and Biden's health advisors wanted to silence are now in charge of the health department. I reached out to Klobuchar's office to see if she still supported this bill, and she did not respond to a request for comment by me. So I think it's a good cautionary tale, Linda. If you're going to propose some new government power, you must imagine that power being wielded by your political rivals, because we change who's in charge every 4 years.
You're right, Robby, and it's a great cautionary tale to the current administration about some of its overreach of presidential authorities that we've been talking about for weeks and weeks on end here, because it, of course, sets a precedent for what may happen when the tables may turn in the future and a Democratic president might be in office. This is why, of course, we have a government that is supposed to be, and you're going to argue with me about this, inefficient by design. We're supposed to be methodical. We're supposed to make changes carefully for exactly the reasons that you're highlighting. I will say, however, that if we are going to go back in the time machine to when COVID was going on and what we knew when we knew it, we do need to recall that we also had a president, the now again President Donald Trump, who at least 65 different times during White House briefings claimed that instead of vaccination, instead of medication, what we should be looking towards is hydroxychloroquine, things that you might use to clean your goldfish bowl, and some other now very seriously debunked theories about what one should be doing instead. The misinformation commander-in-chief.
Well, okay. I mean, I agree with you. I was agreeing with you, and then the agreement meter was decreasing as you kept talking. But obviously, I agree that Republicans in charge should wield power very carefully, yes, because opening the door, government via executive order can be undone via executive order as well. So if they're going to make all these changes that I support to the federal government, unless they're going to actually go through the process of having Congress legislate, all these things can be undone quite easily. Right. We're going to talk about a little bit later on the show about doing just that, about finally congressional Republicans feeling inclined to act to actually do something to support the Trump agenda. So we'll leave it there. Plenty more to discuss and debate today. Now, one thing that the Dems can agree on is that they have no idea how to oppose Trump effectively. We will discuss. Stay tuned. The Daily Wire's Ben Shapiro has a proposal for President Trump. It involves a pardon. Here he is on his show recommending a pardon for, let's watch.
If we are issuing pardons, however, there is one person that President Trump should pardon from federal charges forthwith. It would be incredibly controversial, but I think that it's absolutely necessary. That person is Derek Chauvin. President Trump should, in fact, pardon Derek Chauvin. He should. He should pardon him his federal charges. When it came to BLM, the inciting event for the BLM riots that caused $2 billion in property damage in the United States and set America's race relations on their worst footing in my lifetime was, in fact, the railroading of Derek Chauvin in the death of George Floyd. Nonetheless, on the basis of extraordinarily scanty evidence, and despite the fact that there was massive pressure on the jury, that the mayor of Minneapolis paid a settlement to the George Floyd family immediately, that the president of the United States suggested that Derek Chauvin was guilty right off the bat, that the jurors were being openly threatened and admitted as much. Despite all of that, Derek Chauvin was convicted on federal charges and pled guilty to federal charges.
Shapiro and other co-signers sent a letter to Trump asking him to pardon Derek Chauvin, the Minneapolis police officer who was convicted of killing George Floyd in 2020.
The killing of George Floyd is credited with sparking Black Lives Matter during the pandemic. Protests erupted across the nation calling for restraints on police and how they operated. It spurred a movement to defund the police. Many critics believed it led to an increase in crime.
Ben Shapiro's letter reads in part, George Floyd was high on fentanyl. He had a significant pre-existing heart condition. He was saying he could not breathe before he was even out of the car. Derek Chauvin, for large segments of the widely circulated video of the encounter, had his knee on George Floyd's shoulder or back, not on his neck. This was confirmed by the autopsy, which showed no damage to George Floyd's trachea. Shapiro ended by thanking Trump for committing to ending the weaponization of the justice system.
Robert Samuels, Washington Post reporter and author of His Name is George Floyd, took to X to dispel some notions around Floyd's case. Firstly, Samuel says Floyd didn't die of an overdose, as some on the right claim. Chauvin's defense didn't even make the argument Floyd died of an overdose. Leading pulmonologist Martin Tobin's testimony compelled jurors the most, according to Samuels. He pointed out that Chauvin's knee did shift, but it spent most of the time with its weight on a sensitive part of the neck. 2 separate juries convicted Chauvin. In a federal trial, the jury found Chauvin guilty of violating Floyd's civil rights. In a state trial, the jury found Chauvin guilty of second-degree murder.
But senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, Christopher Rufo, wrote on X, the reality is that Derek Chauvin was made into a scapegoat. His verdict was reached under social duress. The jurors, and by proxy the country, realized that a not guilty decision would plunge America into riots and chaos. So we all shamefully accepted his condemnation. Elon Musk chimed in, as he tends to do from time to time, about 1,000 times every minute. Something to think about.
Contributing writer to The Atlantic, Jamel Hill, wrote, nothing to see here, just Elon Musk suggesting Derek Chauvin should be federally pardoned for murdering George Floyd.
I have a feeling you're not going to be a fan of this pardon, Linda. Look, unlike many others on the right who, I don't know exactly what they're trying to do here, I have no problem asserting that Derek Chauvin's actions with respect to George Floyd were totally improper. He was kneeling on part of him for 10 minutes, and it was a situation where the suspect, George Floyd, was under they had him. They could have just handcuffed him and put him in the car. And the lack of urgency to just do that would have resolved the situation. So the way Derek Chauvin handled it was not appropriate, was not in line with police training, and so I have no problem criticizing him for that or holding him responsible for the death of George Floyd. Now, it is true and has been pointed out by many conservatives that he had drugs in his system and health problems, etc. So who knows exactly what combination of factors necessarily killed him, but even if there were other factors at play, the police officer should not have pinned him down in that way for so long, so it's kind of moot.
Yeah, look, I think it was a very, very dark time in our nation's history, and I think the reason we saw such an incredible outpouring of rage and grief was because what was witnessed on camera in George Floyd's death really reflected fears that Black Americans felt about the way they are perceived and the way that law enforcement has treated them in their own communities. And I think that is not something that you're going to erase nor address by pardoning.
Here's where, I agree that, yes, I don't think Derek Chauvin needs a pardon. But here's where we part ways, because this did become, yes, such an important and foundational issue for Black Lives Matter, a movement and particularly an organization that I think turned into a huge grift by the leaders of it, taking in all this money and donations to purchase hype houses or something of that nature, touching off a summer of widespread rioting and violence and property destruction that did not start to heal the racial divide in the country. And furthermore, while I agree, of course, that there is evidence that there is some level of bias, racial bias in policing, although it's a little bit more difficult to see in the data than people assert. You can certainly be mistreated by the police if you're any other ethnicity as well. In fact, being poor, being lower income is probably the highest correlating factor with being mistreated by the police. It just so happens there are more African Americans who fall into that category. All that said, there was no evidence ever presented that this encounter, that what happened, had anything to do with race. Has anyone ever put forth a shred of evidence that Derek Chauvin's actions, wrong though they were motivated by racial animus? No one has ever suggested that. And yet this is George Floyd became the poster child for racist treatment at the hands of the police, even though there's no evidence that it was racially motivated here at all. That's what always throws me about this case.
Well, I think that it was the straw that broke the camel's back, and that it's no accident that there has been continued discussion about it. I do want to make sure that we're not conflating the Black Lives Matter movement with the defund the police initiative that came after. People who have followed me over the years know I actually did an analysis on some of these issues coming off of the 2020 electoral cycle, and actually, interestingly, the defund the police efforts may actually have done some damage to the Democratic Party, in particular among Latino and Black communities, which felt like that really didn't speak to exactly what the point was as part of this whole larger public discussion, which I think remains really important to this day.
Certainly. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think people who actually live in troubled communities, I mean, it's both. They feel, in many cases, correctly and fairly, that they are both mistreated. They're both mistreated by the police, or in their police interactions are poor. They feel over-policed, but also that the police services are not adequate because they're not sufficiently deterring crime, stopping crime, arresting criminals, and the communities are unsafe. So they both want to be treated better by the police, and also feel like the services they're getting from the police aren't very good. But you're right. If you talk to people in places where there was protesting and rioting and the local convenience store got burned down, ask them whether they want the police abolished. They say, "Are you kidding? Are you crazy?"
Exactly.
That's some left-wing campus idea.
Yeah.
And I think it did do some harm. And certainly, yes, I support the goals of criminal justice reform. I oppose racial profiling of suspects by police, obviously. I think I want people's civil liberties respected. I want police to wear body cams for the suspect's good and for their own. I support a lot of these things, certainly. The leaders of the movement ended up being some grifting individuals, it seems to me.
So I want to go back for a second to something you said earlier about data. The unfortunate truth is that there are some significant bodies of data that show that policing is more intense in Black and brown communities, and in some cases inadvertently incentivized by federal government grants for law enforcement, which have led to increased police stops and things of that nature in communities of color.
Well, no, I don't disagree that the data shows that, but also there's more poverty and more crime disproportionately in these areas. So the question is the increased level of policing right or wrong, or does it correlate with there being more crime in these areas because of, and you can say that's because of the historic legacy of the way Black people have been mistreated in America, that they are more likely to be poor or disadvantaged by our legal system or our economic system because of the way they were treated, and so they're more likely to live in areas where there is poverty, and where there is poverty, there is more likely to be crime, independent of race. It's just that race, because of our unique history, correlates with poverty. And so there is more policing, but the policing might be appropriate to the fact that there's more crime.
But the policing and the data actually show it's still disproportionately more prevalent, even if you overlay the incidence of crime.
Yeah, if you control for poverty, I don't know that it is. And I just never want people to think that the police can't mistreat you because you're white or something. It happens to poor people disproportionately all the time.
So what I think doesn't happen, unless you are a Black American or a Latino American, is that you don't have to sit your child down and tell them you have to behave a certain way if you are ever stopped by a police officer because it may cost you your life. And
that's bad advice, Linda. Everybody should have that conversation
well,
with their kids.
this may be true, but what I'm saying is that the experience, the lived experience of Black Americans in this country has been such that that is a conversation that happens regularly. And that's not something that I see reflected in any other community.
Well, everybody should have that conversation because it can happen to anyone. It just won't be turned into a hashtag unless it happens to a minority person. It can still happen. There was this famous body cam footage of this horrific shooting in a hotel. I can't remember the man's name. White guy killed in just this utterly appalling police brutality instance. It does happen. It just doesn't attract the same kind of attention. Maybe it happens I'm not arguing or dismissing that it happens disproportionately to people of color. That is the case. But it doesn't just happen to people of color. It is because for me as a libertarian, it's a government versus the citizens issue. Our police are government employees who work for us, and they have to comport themselves with a standard of behavior the way that there are employees. Now, that doesn't mean they have a difficult and important job, and they deserve our respect and our thanks. They put their lives on the line, absolutely. We need police. I don't want to defund the police at all. I think in some areas less policing is called for, in some areas more policing is called for. I'm absolutely in favor of that. We need to solve more homicides. Absolutely. The police resources in the city of D.C. are inadequate right now. That's been a recurring problem, that there are not as many police officers as there used to be. And I think that has contributed to an increase in crime in this city specifically. Last year, things are a little bit better this year. So I'm all for that.
Look, I think that when you see widespread pain, anger, grief, what we just talked about in any community, that is something that we should be paying really close attention to. The same way we have these discussions about white working class voters, for example, who were very clear about the concerns that they have had increasingly over both Democratic and Republican administrations over the past several decades now. I think that these two things are related in a way, right? We're just not paying attention to what people are saying are troubling them and impacting their lives.
Let us know what you think. Up next, could the war of words between China and the U.S. become even more of an actual war? We'll discuss. Stay with us. Things are heating up between the United States and China.
And it seems to be stemming from Trump's tariff threats.
Trump has doubled the amount of tariffs on Chinese goods to 20%.
And Beijing has hit the U.S. with an additional 15% tariffs on a range of farm exports and an extra 10% tariffs on things like soybeans, dairy products, fruits, and vegetables.
The Chinese embassy tweeted this week, if the U.S. truly wants to solve the fentanyl issue, then the right thing to do is to consult with China by treating each other as equals. If war is what the U.S. wants, be it a tariff war, trade war, or any other type of war, we're ready to fight till the end. Here's Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's response.
Well, we're prepared. Those who long for peace must prepare for war. That's why we're rebuilding our military. That's why we're reestablishing deterrence and the warrior ethos, is because we live in a dangerous world with powerful, ascendant countries with very different ideologies. If we want to deter war with the Chinese or others, we have to be strong. And that president understands peace comes through strength. He also has a great relationship with that gentleman right there, too, Xi Jinping. So where we can partner, where we can cooperate to recognize that we don't want war with China, we don't seek that war, we will. And the president has sought historic peace and historic opportunities. But my job as the Secretary of Defense is to make sure we're ready. We need the defense spending, the capabilities, the weapons, and the posture in the Indo-Pacific, which is something we're very much focused on.
Now, the president's tariffs have come under scrutiny. When he announced tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China this week, he shook up the markets. Trump did seem to give the auto industry another chance, however, specifically those following the rules of a 2020 U.S., Mexico, and Canada, or USMCA trade agreement. He delayed the tariffs for a month. He had a call Tuesday with automaker CEOs and wants them to expand production in the United States.
But are these tariffs giving Trump the results that he wants? Trump has reiterated that if companies want to avoid tariffs, well, then they should build in the U.S. And apparently some have done just that. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing announced this week they were investing $100 billion into the U.S. to build more factories here. And SoftBank, a Japanese internet services company, announced in December they were investing $100 billion in America to create 100,000 AI and tech jobs. And an Emirati property development company pledged in January a $20 billion investment for data centers in America. Then there's Apple, who sometimes manufactures overseas in places like China, India, and of course Taiwan. They committed a $500 billion investment in the U.S. They plan to invest in silicon engineering and AI, build a factory in Texas, and a manufacturing academy.
Podcaster Ed Krasenstein wrote on X, "Remember when Republicans kept claiming that Biden was going to start World War III? I don't remember this type of Chinese threat under Biden, do you?"
Author Gordon Chang chimed in, writing, "The global trade war did not break out today. It broke out decades ago when China adopted criminal and predatory trade policies. President Trump is only responding, defending our economy." I agreed essentially with Pete Hegseth's comments there. I don't think they were particularly controversial. We don't want a military confrontation with China, and I'm all for diplomacy with China. I'm glad President Trump is open always to dialogue with President Xi Jinping. That said, we need to have economic security, and we can't be overly reliant on China particularly for semiconductors. And though we don't want Taiwan to come under any threat either, we probably shouldn't be reliant on Taiwan for semiconductors either, given how proximate they are to China. I am always skeptical that we will be able to do manufacturing again in this country. I think the regulatory and labor barriers to actually building those kinds of things here cannot be overcome, but I'd be happy to be proven wrong. I know this is a major goal of Trump with the tariffs. Now, I would always say, if it takes massive economic intervention from the government in the form of tariffs or subsidies in order to make the things built here, that's not sustainable and is not a good idea. That's my view.
I think generally we agree on tariffs and specifically on the broad use of tariffs as opposed to strategic use of tariffs. I just want to make sure to translate specifically what the Defense Secretary of the United States of America just said on camera. He said that the American people are willing to put their lives on the line in defense of tariffs, which, by the way, are going to raise prices here for ordinary, everyday American families. And this is against the backdrop, of course, of an administration that has decided it is backing full-throatedly away from defending Ukraine and democracy in the European Union. But, okay, we're willing to go to war for tariffs.
Yeah, look, viewers know that I just call it like I see it. Sometimes I agree with Trump, sometimes I don't. I broadly agree with Trump's foreign policy and even his actions on Ukraine, which I know you don't agree with. The tariffs is the area on which I disagree with Trump the most strongly, because like you just said, I think even short-term economic pain in terms of prices for the American people is a bad idea. Now, you can make the case that with China, that it's necessary because of a larger national security problem that we have with China. I think it's harder to make that case for Mexico and Canada. I think it's especially hard to make that case with Canada. And then when you start getting exceptions for car companies, then here's my broader problem is, I think some of the progressive or Democratic criticisms of Musk and the other people that are now advising Trump in terms of the conflict of interest can be overblown. It is the case there's broad-based tariffs, but if you're a CEO there's some list of firms or industries that can get exceptions if you have a positive relationship with Trump or you're doing what he says or just a positive relationship with the government, then that's very much just, to my mind, progressive governance. That's the government picking winners and losers. That's crony corporatism. That's the government trying to plan the economy and say, well, this firm is indispensable, so they get an exception. This one is not. We know that's going to end up being corrupt and political. So if you're going to start doing exceptions to the tariffs anyway, there's no point to have them. So I would be harshly critical of this move, in fact.
Well, glad to hear it.
Yeah.
I generally think the challenge with this administration is that it doesn't feel like these big sweeping changes that the president and his top leadership are pushing are very thoughtful. It's not as if they've come at us with a very specific strategy and a really good explanation for why Americans are going to, quote, feel some pain, which may not seem like a big deal to billionaires, but it is obviously a really big deal to people who are having trouble finding eggs, and if they do find them, being able to afford them.
Yeah. Biden, of course, was also a fan of tariffs, though. Biden implemented tariffs against China. He continued the tariffs from the Trump administration. There is, in my view, far too much bipartisan agreement to do trade wars and tariffs that raise the prices and hurt ordinary Americans. I don't know why political leaders can't just get the message that the people do not want to pay more for things. Stop messing with the economy in this way. That's like the clearest signal they're trying to send through the way that they have voted in previous elections. So like you just said, I think it is incumbent on the administration to explain what they're actually trying to get out of Canada and Mexico. And again, if it's more about, well, here is some national security diplomatic goal I have and now it's been reached, okay. If it's, we're trying to, reshore manufacturing here, which I'm just so skeptical. If it works, great. If they want to come build things here, great. But if they'll only build things here because they get a subsidy and because they have all the other goods placed tariffs on, then it's not real. That's not the market at work. If the market can support it, and I would be for relaxing the other things that make it more difficult, but I think the better path is to find good trade partners around in other parts of the world who want to do manufacturing and want to be in a strategic economic alliance with the U.S.
I think the real point is if there's going to be value received on both ends of any sort of a trade agreement, whether that is precipitated because of some strategic use of tariffs or it's just a multilateral agreement where we're saying, hey, country X, you're providing certain goods to us and the value we're giving you is we're helping you create jobs in your own country. I feel like that is a fair way to look at it.
All right, stay with us. More Rising right after this. There may be only one thing Democrats can agree on, and that's how badly in disarray they are. They're beginning to eat their own as the different factions battle over how to counter the Trump juggernaut.
All of it was displayed Tuesday on live TV during the president's speech Tuesday evening. There were some lawmakers vociferously protesting, like Representative Al Green. The vice president had him removed from the chamber. Then there was the progressive wing, many of whom showed up with small placards as small signs of protest.
Many centrist Dems did oppose these tactics. Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania posted on X, "A sad cavalcade of self-owns and unhinged petulance. It only makes Trump look more presidential and restrained. We're becoming the metaphorical car alarms that nobody pay attention to, and it may not be the winning message." Another Dem told Axios to call it a strategy would be a stretch. Late-night comedians couldn't help themselves either. Let's watch Jimmy Fallon.
See that?
Oh. Yeah. Trump was confused by the paddles. He was like, we're not auctioning off Greenland until later.
Har har. Michael Costa had this to say.
And they came with props, too, holding up little paddles like they were ready to give Mike Johnson a naughty little spanking, huh? Either that or a pickleball match.
Some of the Dems who voted yes include Representatives Barra, Costa, and Swozey. One Dem told Axios anonymously that he believed what Green did was inappropriate as he became the story, and the story was not the price of eggs. So this vote has taken place, and I think people are pretty surprised that 10 Democrats joined in to the censure vote. What do you make of this?
I'm going to get some hate mail for what I'm about to say.
Oh, boy.
But if you were upset when Congressman Joe Wilson yelled out during Barack Obama's State of the Union address, "You lie," which folks may remember as it made viral content, then you should be upset when this president is disrupted as well. If nowhere else in the federal government there should be decorum, there should be decorum when the president is standing at the lectern addressing the entire chamber. So again, I'm sure I'm going to get hate mail on it, but I don't think that was the way to do it. You know, the other lines of attack here, they did really look like auction paddles to me, as if, you know, something was up for sale at the moment. The other critique here I agree with, which is that there was an opportunity with tens of millions of viewers watching from around the country, and of course we know that the majority of them were likely to be Republicans and independents because that's just sort of the pattern, depending on which party's in power. But you still had this massive audience. You had the opportunity to refocus the narrative, refocus the conversation on the thing you and I have been talking about, the price of eggs, the price of groceries, the economic impact on working people.
Yeah, I think the stunt was just not effective at all. I don't care all that much about decorum. Yeah, people should be respectful, but...
No one's surprised to hear you say that.
Whatever. But it doesn't, I don't know what he was trying to accomplish. It just looked very scripted and very silly and very rehearsed, not genuine or authentic. This is the thing that Trump has a level of authenticity that so many rivals, especially in the Democratic side, just can't match right now. Like, it didn't feel authentic to me. It felt very, yeah, this was our planned stunt for the evening. And who was impressed by it? I don't think anyone. I think it did distract from the message. But the real problem is Democrats just don't have a messenger for their message. I mean, I think their message is wrong, but they also just don't have someone who's an appealing media figure to deliver that message. They're still relying on people like Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi behind the scenes, very elderly political leaders who I don't think know how to reach young voters who have increasingly moved right. I don't think they understand how to reach them on the mediums that they, the ways that they engage with information. It's just a very out-of-touch party in terms of the technological capability for discussing people, for reaching their voters, and I think that's really showing.
Well, I think that the messenger should be the people, and that's where you and I really diverge here. I don't think there should be a solo, I'm the leader of the Democratic Party and you should listen to me. Another reason why I've gotten hate mail recently. I think it should be the voices of the people who have lost their jobs recently because of the impacts of the administration's policies. It should be that farmer who is now going to go bankrupt because they're not getting USAID funding, which people don't know also impacts farmers here in the U.S. So it should really be reshifting the focus to the voices of the people who are actually harmed by what's going on. Now, one thing I will say about Representative Al Green, I do not think it was, you know, this scripted, stunty sort of thing. He is somebody who comes from the generation that was inspired by Martin Luther King Jr., that was part of civil disobedience actions, in fact, one of which I organized many, many years ago now, that was very focused on highlighting the plight of working people who weren't able to make their ends meet. But Al Green, I think, has been a longtime crusader who believes in protest as a way of focusing, you know, the people onto a particular issue that should be of note.
Yeah, I don't know. He was brandishing a cane at the president was not a great idea, I don't think. Even though they're fine to, you know, have it be a British Parliament system where everybody yells at each other. That's fine. I don't care about that. I'd rather it be real than be fake. But I just don't think. I also don't think people were paying attention that much to this address.
Well, it was 100 minutes long.
It was a long time. It was a long time. I was getting sleepy by the end. Hearing a lot of the same. As I said, it should have just been the whole time Trump rattling off examples of spending that the Dems, I guess, support and his faction doesn't. I think that would have been more successful. What did you make of? I didn't get a chance to ask you this yet because you weren't on earlier in the week. Conservatives very sharply criticized the perception that Democrats were not standing or cheering or applauding the young man who was there who had cancer. Do you think that was well handled by the Democrats?
So
I just want to get you more hate mail.
Yeah, I think it depended on
mail.
where you were in the room. As I understand it, there were certainly Democrats that were standing. There were also Democrats that stood, of course, with the president and at the appropriate times. But what you saw on certain camera angles was that they were not standing.
Coming up next on Rising, Trump is threatening to pull funding from colleges and universities that allow what he calls illegal protests. More Rising right after this. Well, the NYPD stormed New York's Barnard College on Wednesday afternoon, arresting 9 who were protesting against Israel. Students and others were ordered to shelter in place after the college received a bomb threat. This comes as its affiliate, Columbia University, is again in the spotlight. It was just about a year ago that the university served as the epicenter of pro-Palestinian protests that spread on campuses across the country. President Trump threatened Tuesday to pull funding from any school, college, or university that allows what he calls illegal protests. The president posted on Truth Social, quote, "Agitators will be imprisoned or permanently sent back to the country from which they came. American students will be permanently expelled or, depending on the crime, arrested." The president's warning came a day after a Barnard College employee was hurt in yet another pro-Gaza protest that was staged on Monday.
It also follows the Department of Education, Health and Human Services, and General Services Administration's announcement that they are conducting a review of Columbia's federal contracts. Separately, the newly established task force to combat anti-Semitism is considering stop work ordered for $51.4 million in federal contracts for Columbia. It will visit 9 other universities to investigate anti-Semitism. Trump's latest move has been met with criticism that it could have a chilling effect on free speech. The Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression denounced Trump's threat. In a statement published Wednesday, the organization wrote in part, quote, "As FIRE knows too well from our work defending student and faculty rights under the Obama and Biden administrations, threatening schools with the loss of federal funding will result in a crackdown on lawful speech. Schools will censor first and ask questions later." Joining us now to further discuss this is Alex Morley, the Vice President of Campus Advocacy at FIRE. Welcome, Alex.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
Well, there's been a lot of coverage over the last couple of years in particular about these different kinds of protests. Give us a sense of your take on the significance of what the Trump administration is pushing here.
Well, look, under every administration that we've seen in FIRE's existence for the last quarter century, we have seen folks lose their principles when it comes to potentially censoring speech they dislike. What we want, especially under this administration, where there has been a lot of confusion, is for folks to refocus on the core principles and what is really clear. What's clear is that colleges have a long and good history on American college campuses specifically, of hosting a wide variety of protests, of playing host to all kinds of debate, discussion, viewpoint diversity. What we don't want as this new administration is coming in is to just, now we're going to censor different views, right? Instead, we want a refocus on principles that we want to see in every administration, on every college campus, under every college president, that we're going to respect a wide range of views. We're going to have full and complete tolerance for even the most controversial expression in every political climate. And we're not going to allow things like violence, discriminatory harassment, properly defined vandalism. We're not going to let people take over libraries and, hog the quad for their protest and not let other folks have their protests as well. But this all flows from a recommitment to those first clear core principles that are, that come from almost a century now of really good First Amendment jurisprudence. It's a question about whether or not this administration has a handle on that, or whether or not they're just simply, swapping DEI views from the last administration and censoring everything else. They're just switching that, and now they're going to censor views that are not sufficiently anti-DEI. We don't want that.
Let's talk about specifically what is happening at Barnard College right now with a building being occupied. So they have obviously the right to engage in free speech, engage in protest, to use the public spaces in the campus. What is at play, or what should a university, if they're going to respond in a way that is consistent with free speech and First Amendment principles, how should they handle a situation where there are student protesters occupying a space like a building, not going to leave or disperse, being there, multiple days in a row? What is the action that should be taken at that point?
This is a great hypothetical. This is a perfect one to talk through all the nuances here. So what we would like to see ideally on a college campus that welcomes all views is that they make sure that if students want to protest spontaneously about the issue of the day, schools allow that in typically outdoor open areas of campus. They allow leafleting. They allow students to write op-eds. There's this robust kind of discourse going on about whatever is the issue of the day. And administrators are not saying, well, you know, we don't want to allow the pro-Palestine stuff right now. We're going to make those students jump through extra hoops. No, it's fair for everyone. Viewpoint neutral criteria applied in every situation. While at the same time, schools are going to make sure that they are enforcing their time, place, and manner regulations. We don't want students taking over the library while other people are studying. We don't want students protesting at midnight near dormitories when other students are sleeping. We don't want students erecting structures or tables or stopping people from moving around campus. Those would be time, place, and manner regulations that schools can and in many cases should be implementing in a viewpoint neutral way. Again, not extra hoops for certain protesters. We treat every protester equally. Then there's also a hard line against not just, you know, we're not talking civil disobedience or time, place, and manner regulations, but when students or other outside actors are clearly engaging in things like violence or making true threats, hurting people as they try to take over a building, stopping students from going to class, administrators need to take a hard line there and make sure they have ample security on hand to deal with those issues. So TLDR, full protection for peaceful protest, even the most controversial stuff that some people don't like to hear. Zero tolerance and action when it comes to folks engaging in violence or stopping the educational process in some way.
And then what? Oh, go ahead, Linda.
I was just going to say, Alex, this isn't the first time we have seen this administration use the threat of removing federal resources as a way to have its will be done. And I suspect it won't be the last. You clearly have a really strong understanding of the lines here. What sort of recourse do these universities have if they were, for example, to continue to permit students on their campuses to do the kind of free speech activities that you described that don't fall in the line of vandalism or violence?
Yeah, you know, the concern is that we want any government actor that is wielding some kind of cudgel, whether it's federal funding or investigation, or we're going to haul you before Congress and ask you a bunch of questions. You know, we want that to be done in line with precedent and existing laws, right? So when the government has cause to believe that, for example, a school is violating a federal law like Title VI or Title IX, Title VI allowing students to be discriminated against on the basis of protected status, not only is it okay for the federal government to investigate and look into that, but they should. But our concern here is that with this administration, it has been unclear, you know, as it was in many ways with other administrations as well, whether or not these investigations are being prompted simply by speech, or whether or not the subtext, sometimes clearer language than not. Sometimes we have it clear, sometimes we have it not unclear, depending on whether or not you're looking at an executive order, etc. The clarity is not there about what exactly this administration is asking universities to do. The subtext in some of these cases seems to suggest that universities ought to be cracking down on certain viewpoints rather than focusing on the type of misconduct that would lead to a violation of federal law. So why are you, with the latest Truth Social post from President Trump suggesting, a crackdown on quote unquote illegal protests? The question is he focusing on discriminatory harassment or a violation of Title VI? Or is he suggesting that simply allowing students to go protest wearing keffiyehs or protest for Gaza is somehow, quote unquote, illegal? The First Amendment is clear. It is not illegal. Protest is not illegal. Violence, discriminatory harassment, those kinds of things are, it is misconduct that the federal government can and should crack down on. But again, we need a refocus on what's the law, what are the principles. We don't just want certain types of views censored on campus. Instead, we want to respect everyone's rights to bring a diversity of views to the American college campus. That's a long and proud tradition, and the president has made lots of statements too that he wants to be a free speech president. He wants to bring back free expression to the American college campus, and we want to see him deliver.
As you point out, these issues have been litigated at the highest level before the Supreme Court numerous times. There are now, it's clearly defined what is, broadly speaking, what is free speech, and then what are the narrow categories of behavior that fall outside that protection. It's not like any kind of mystery, so it's remarkable that so many universities keep getting it wrong, and then so many administrations keep, as you said, applying this selectively. It seems like it'd be the easiest thing in the world to say peaceful protesting against Israel, for Gaza, against terrorism, whatever it is. It's so easy to apply these principles consistently, or should be easy, and yet it is seldom done except by organizations like yourself, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. Thank you so much for joining us today, Alex Morley. We appreciate it.
Thanks to you both.
The Supreme Court burst the Trump administration's bubble yesterday, ruling that $2 billion in USAID funding had to be doled out after all. But is there a way Republicans can get around this legal warfare and actually make DOGE recommended cuts? Here's Senator Lindsey Graham on Fox proposing just such a strategy. It'll be familiar to you because I proposed it as well. Let's watch.
Here's the problem for the Democratic Party. Trump made them look bad by using humor and common sense. And the list of programs that they were spending your money on makes you laugh, cry, and pissed off. So what I want to do is take all those things that DOGE has found, all the silly spending, and put it in a bill called rescission and vote on it on the floor of the United States Senate and the House. And I dare them to vote to keep this kind of crazy stuff going.
What an idea. You heard it here first. Graham also took to X yesterday, writing, "This afternoon I had an excellent meeting with Elon Musk and my Senate GOP colleagues. It is now time for the White House to put together a rescissions package so that Congress can turn DOGE's work product into law and actually save money for the American people." Elon seemed to be very enthusiastic over the prospect of a rescissions package. I couldn't agree more. Musk responded to Graham, "Sounds like a good idea." Now, according to Axios, Senator Rand Paul first pitched the idea to Musk.
If Republicans decide to follow through on the package, they could pass it with only 51 votes. That means they won't need any help from Democrats.
Paul said he'd like a $500 billion cut, but the senators and Musk have not discussed specific numbers.
Republicans tried this during Trump's first term. They wanted to cut $15 billion by passing a rescission package. Senators Susan Collins and Richard Burr voted no, which stopped the bill in its tracks.
Senator Mike Lee wrote on X, "DOGE can't be a flash in the pan. We must make these corrections statutory and permanent."
Attorney Joyce Vance wrote on Blue Sky, "DOGE isn't firing people to make government more efficient. Let's just get that one out of the way and move on."
I'll see about that.
You know what I'm going to say about this, Robby?
Go ahead.
Okay, so Senator Graham says, hey, let's take DOGE's list, and that's going to be the basis for our package, but maybe there needs to be a little more scrubbing and vetting of that list, because as you and I've talked about, there's some doozies on the list that were not accurate. So if we're going to do something like this, and you and I've talked about this before, I don't have a problem with looking at ways to make us spend taxpayer dollars better. I think that's a great idea. The problem is it's been so willy-nilly, it's been haphazard, and worse yet, it's been inaccurate.
Some of it has been inaccurate, but I don't know that serious accuracy arguments or inaccuracy arguments have been made against the list Trump rattled off at the State of the Union or the State of the Union address. I mean, it was so glorious. It was humorous. It was funny. And do the Democrats want to be the party that stands in the way of ending funding for those things? It's clearly popular. It's clearly something Americans want, is to cancel some of these silly spending programs. But you're right, and Democrats are right that Elon Musk can't just, they can delay the spending, but if it's been authorized by Congress, it needs to be deauthorized by Congress.
That's right.
Through rescissions. So they need to do it. Rand Paul has been harping on this correctly for a while, so have I, that they can't just rely on Elon Musk and Donald Trump. And so when push comes to shove, the rubber meets the road, whatever metaphor you want to use, we'll find out whether Republicans can actually do this, because, as you noted, Susan Collins and Richard Burr got in the way last time. Now Republicans have a healthier majority in the Senate, so they could stand to have another defection from Susan Collins and a few others, and they could still get it done. I hope they do, because I think they're just going to have no credibility with their voters if they fail to do this. Now, maybe that's what they want. They don't want to be on the hook for like, oh no, I cost my district or this or that any kind of spending cut. And they're cheering at the State of the Union address for Trump calling out spending that they agreed to spend. And it's rank hypocrisy. But now is the time to not be hypocritical and actually pass this.
Well, this is why, of course, you see people like my former boss, now Senator Tim Kaine, trying to force votes on any sort of decreases, because he wants to see people on the record. If they are going to be for taking away resources that benefit our communities, he wants to see them on the record. Mm-hmm. And that, of course, is going to ultimately come into play in the midterms in 2022. All of this discussion, all of this back and forth between Elon Musk and either members on the Senate side or members on the congressional side, what it really all amounts to is that they will do whatever's in their interest, because their names are on the ballot in the next electoral cycle and his is not. So I think it behooves them, I hope that they take this word of caution, to be very thoughtful and to be really sure that if they're going to make any cuts, they're doing the ones that they feel like will actually make a difference.
Sure, they should be very thoughtful about it, but there is a danger in inaction, I would say. Many of these members, Senate, House, etc., their voters want them to implement the Trump agenda on the right. They voted for them because they want them to do what Trump says. Republicans were not installed or reelected or elected for the first time in order to thwart Trump. They were installed to make sure he implements his policy agenda. And a key and important part of his policy agenda is reducing the size and scope of the federal government, reducing the number of federal employees we have, getting rid of spending that is not consistent with an America First ethos. I agree with you that there is not a political will in the country to do massive cuts to entitlement spending, unfortunately, even though I personally would be in favor of massive cuts to entitlement spending. Marianne Williamson.
Social Security,
absolutely.
Medicare.
Cut them all. You think we as reasonably young people are going to get anything out of these programs by the time we're at that age? Absolutely not. It's generational warfare. But Marianne Williamson and I debated that at great length yesterday, if people want to tune into that. But I agree, you can't do massive cuts to entitlement without blowback from the American people. I'm being politically, strategically reasonable. You can do cuts to USAID without suffering political blowback. These things will clearly be unpopular. If I was Trump, I said this yesterday, but during the joint address, the address to the joint session of Congress, I would have made the whole thing just listing ridiculous things USAID spends money on. There's popularity, I believe, to do those kinds of cuts, not some of the other stuff.
So where I would gently push back on you, Robby, is that I do not believe that the American people elected Donald Trump or elected the other Republican leaders in this country to do Donald Trump's bidding. I think they elected Donald Trump because they thought he was going to do something about inflation. They thought he was going to do something about the price of groceries. They thought he was going to do something about the economics that actually impact their daily lives. And instead of doing that, he has focused on, or he has permitted Elon Musk to focus on, things like cutting USAID, the latest move here to cut the Department of Education, which I do not think that there is uniform support.
Not just cut, eliminate.
Eliminate, which I don't think he's going to be successful at, but that's a whole other discussion. But the point being, he's not addressing the things that he won for. He's not taking action to address the concerns that people really elected him for.
Coming up on Rising, we will discuss the future of electric vehicles. Stay tuned.
We ended the last administration's insane electric vehicle mandate.
President Trump is already rolling back Biden-era mandates and incentives for Americans who want to buy electric vehicles. Not only that, he squashed former President Biden's non-binding goal to have EVs make up half of new cars sold by 2030.
It remains to be seen what this means for Elon Musk, Tesla, and other EV manufacturers. But regardless of the U.S. pivot away from EVs, China is driving the market globally. It now produces 60% of EVs worldwide and 80% of the batteries that power them. China sold nearly 13 million fully electric and hybrid vehicles in 2024. The U.S. lagged far behind, selling only 1.3 million EVs last year. Joining us now to make sense of all this and sharing his insight on the future of EVs in the U.S. is Brendan Jones, an industry expert on electric vehicles and infrastructure and the former president and CEO of Blink Charging. Welcome. Brendan, there is so much to talk about here, and I'm very excited to dig into it. As you know, EVs are kind of my thing. I would love for you to just open by giving us the lay of the land. We've seen a lot of back and forth here about what does this mean, what's Tesla's role in all of this, what's Elon Musk's role in all of this, but just zoom us out a little bit and tell us what's going on.
Absolutely, and I think, Linda, you hit the high points. So we saw a total industry volume in EVs in the U.S. That increased by 7.3%. The outside of EVs, the general industry in the U.S. for automotive increased an anemic 1.7%. So for 2024, you actually saw a significant increase. Now, it remains to be seen if that can be sustained with the changes to incentives that we have seen that are going to play out throughout the remainder of 2025. But Tesla remains one of the largest players in the industry, despite dropping global market share by about 2%, because they were at 50. Now they've dropped to about 48. Now, what's concerning for Tesla is their drop in the U.S. was 6%, compared to the industry increasing by 7.3%. So we have to look at what does that mean. Now, you hear a lot of anecdotal, and you hear some statements about the political side of it. But in reality, if we analyze Tesla, they have an aging fleet. They have to heavily incentivize that fleet. They have to have new model entries because they're a big automotive company right now with big automotive company issues and problems. So, and consequently, because of all the other OEMs investing in EVs, the competition has increased dramatically. So sometimes people worry about Tesla and say, well, it's because of the political side that their volume is down. But if you look at the mechanics of the company, the model line, the increased competition, there are other answers to that. And like any good OEM, Tesla will respond with new models, increased incentives, and new introductions over the years. Now, that doesn't answer the question, though, of what's going to happen in the U.S. with EVs with the removal incentives. That's a larger question. And we're going to have to look to Q1 sales this year and then probably into Q2 this year to really get a feel for what's happening.
In addition to the incentives, I know it was a major goal of the government to build various charging stations throughout the country, and I know there's been some criticism about the perceived slow pace of that. Can you speak to that issue, where we stand now? Are they indeed having some trouble in getting those stations built?
Sure. So let's talk about it from a high line first. So there was a certain amount of optimism on the time frame it took to really install comprehensive DC fast chargers that had a power expectation between 150 and 350 kilowatts. In reality, having been part of that industry for a long time, it takes a long time to get it done. 18 to 24 months on average is what it takes from when you acquire a piece of property to actually getting the charger in the ground. So some of that slowness is due to that, but other slowness is due to states willing to adopt and roll out the necessary programs. Because as you remember, the money was divided to all 50 states, and it was up to the state to initiate the program. So you have a lot of states to date didn't even initiate the NEVI program, which is one of the true root causes of the slowness.
Brendan, we've been talking about China quite a lot on this program today and in previous weeks. And you heard me lay out some of the big picture stats here for the industry writ large. What's your take on our ability to compete with China today, tomorrow, and over the long term, given the recent backslide in terms of government support for EV incentives?
Sure. So let's go to one of the automotive giants first. So the President and CEO of GM visited China, and he looked at their EV lineup across the board, and he came back amazed and said, these cars are great. So first we have to erase this old notion that they're lacking in quality. The cars in Europe that are being sold now that are Chinese manufactured are very good EV vehicles, and they're at a cheaper price. So that's one thing. From global competition, we have vehicles being made and manufactured at a high level of quality at a lower price. And what does that mean for the US? And indeed, what does that mean for Europe as well? Because Europe is facing the same level of tariffs that we're looking at in the United States against Chinese manufactured product. The other thing we need to be concerned in the US is, what does that do to value added technology on a manufacturing level and the spin-offs from there? We're all very much aware that when you introduce battery technology, new EV systems, both from a diagnostic and from an intelligence system within the vehicle, that are aimed towards efficiency in fuel consumption, efficiency in the ownership of the vehicle, all of that gets spin-off technology. Battery technology has implications across the US economy, from the industry, distributed energy models, and everything. So the question is, if we fall behind on EVs, do we subsequently fall behind on other spin-off technologies, which will be value added? And we know by fact that value added technologies pay a higher wage. The manufacturing with them creates a better economy in the area where they're manufactured, etc. So we really need to look at that in a bipartisan manner to see what the effect is and what we need to do, because we don't want to cede that technology exclusively to China. Because China is going to get to a point where the only vehicles produced in China are electric vehicles. That will effectively shut off that market to the rest of the world unless they can compete with EVs.
Is it, what do we make of the fact that Elon Musk has become this very pivotal government advisor in the second Trump administration? And I know there are plenty of concerns about conflict of interest in government contracts, how that could work out to benefit all of his many companies. So is it striking that the action being taken on this front is to get rid of the incentive to buy more of this product that Elon Musk is responsible for? Does that cut against some of this concern, I suppose?
I'm not going to comment on the political positions of Mr. Musk, but I will say that when you look at this industry, there's one thing that we've always understood: the industry has to become sustainable. It has to be able to stand on its own. It has to be able to compete with ICE vehicles without incentives for the government. So in one view, this is an acceleration of what had to come out anyway. The $7,500 tax credit wasn't going to be around forever, but we also keep in mind with that tax credit, it's only an income tax credit. It's not a $7,500 rebate, which many people interpret it to be, and it's not. So you have to have the requisite income to qualify for the $7,500 anyway. So it's going to have an impact mostly on the lease side of the business, because you could take the whole $7,500 if you were a captive finance company or a bank. So I'm not going to comment on the political side, but I'd say Tesla, we're seeing some signs on the Tesla side of a slowdown, but I think those are more aligned with the general industry position of Tesla. And I think Mr. Musk has always done a brilliant job in this space. He's going to come back, and Tesla's going to find a way to introduce new models to invigorate their lineup and to continue to sell cars.
Brendan, hard to think of someone who has seen more angles of this industry than you have. And so before we let you go, I just would love for you to look into your crystal ball and tell us what you expect us to see this summer, later this year, when it comes to EVs and EV charging.
It's a great question, and there's a multiplicity of answers right now because there's a lot of unknown. And when you look at even analysts and some of the best, there's some contradiction in the data. So definitely EVs are going to slow down a bit in the short term. And you're going to find the manufacturers, the infrastructure companies re-identifying what their footing is in the space and how they can make money and how they can achieve sustainability. But in the long term, we're going to see this industry grow, and all the data suggests that. It may slow down for a period of time, and there's certainly indicators that validate that. But also all the other variables indicate it's going to grow and continue to grow over time. Now, instead of government incentives, we're going to see a lot more infusion in cash from private equity and others. You may see a couple more startups that are publicly traded, But overall, you'll see some consolidation in Europe and the United States, and then you'll see some reemergence of new companies, and you're going to continue to see a drive towards profitability. But yeah, little softness at first, then long-term growth is what my prediction is.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
All right, absolutely. It was great fun.
Did politics intervene with 2 astronauts being stranded in space for 9 months instead of just a week? It is possible. Let's listen to what astronaut Butch Wilmore told a reporter.
Elon Musk has said that he made the offer to bring you guys back earlier and that it was denied. My first question is that true? And if so, what would that have looked like? Was he offering to make another flight, push seats on another flight? Could you give us some background there?
I can only say that Mr. Musk, what he says is absolutely factual. We have no information on that, though, whatsoever. What was offered, what was not offered, who it was offered to, how that process went. That's information that we simply don't have. So I believe him. I don't know all those details, and I don't think any of us really can give you the answer that you would be hoping for.
Wilmore and Sunita Suni Williams were on board Boeing's new Starliner capsule when it launched last June, making its crew debut after years of delay. The pair expected to be gone just a week or so, but the Starliner had so many problems getting to the space station that NASA ruled it too dangerous to carry anyone, and it flew back empty. Their homecoming was further delayed by extra completion time needed for the brand new SpaceX capsule that was supposed to deliver their replacements.
Elon Musk's SpaceX launched a Crew Dragon capsule to rescue the pair last September, but after it docked at the space station, NASA opted to stall its return. Now, many on the right are blasting the Biden administration on social media. Independent journalist Kyle Becker wrote on X, "What Elon Musk says is absolutely factual," quoting what the astronaut said. Astronauts confirm Biden stranded them in space because of a political dispute with Elon Musk. Libs of TikTok wrote on X, "Holy astronaut who's stranded in space says it's true that Elon offered to rescue them earlier. Biden didn't accept for political purposes." Straight up evil. Bill Ackman, CEO of Pershing Square, also chimed in, quote, "So not only did Biden not invite Elon Musk to the White House EV summit, Biden would not let Elon retrieve the astronauts from the space station. When a president puts our astronauts at risk for his own political benefit, we have reached a new low point in presidential history." And if that is indeed the case, the reason Elon was not allowed to bring them home, I bet the astronauts are not so happy about that. They got to be getting bored up there, even if they really get along with each other. They have to be sick of the same person after 9 months. I hope. Now, I know they're on the space station. They have plenty of provisions. I hope they have board games or something. You could become a master Scrabble player in that time. Elon has suggested that this plan was sabotaged because of the personal animosity that Biden holds for Elon, given that he's gotten all in on Trump. And when asked about it, the astronaut. So I didn't read him as exactly confirming that was the case.
Right. He didn't say anything political.
He said Musk is absolutely factual, and then said, but I don't know anything about this. So I wonder. It kind of sounded to me like he's just saying, well, I trust what Musk has to say in general. So if that's his characterization, I agree with it, but I don't have any independent verification of it. So who knows? We need new, more good reporting probably to get to the bottom of that.
Right. And what we do know is that no matter what was offered, not offered, that it is a significant undertaking to go into space. And who knows what sort of process considerations there were, what may or may not have worked that needed to work in order to send somebody up there. What I do know is that this is not necessarily an entirely altruistic endeavor, right? We know that SpaceX sells its capsules and the use of its capsules to the federal government to the tune of, as I was once told, $60 million each time.
I mean, that might just be what it costs, right? It's expensive to go into space. I certainly hope an effort is made to rescue. They're not in mortal peril or anything of that nature, but certainly bring them home. They have to
their families must
miss their families. They must miss being on the planet Earth. So we hope to have them retrieved soon, politics or not. That does it for us today on Rising. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. Thanks so much for watching. See you later.